In a dim wooden room, a single candle flickered as Thomas knelt on the floor, whispering a broken prayer. The silence pressed like a heavy veil until shadows shifted unnaturally against the walls. A metallic taste filled the air, and the flame elongated as if drawn by unseen breath. The vibration in the floor shook loose, the dust of forgotten years. Thomas gasped, his heart pounding as the candle exploded into a pale white fire. He shielded his eyes, yet the searing brilliance marked his soul. From the radiance, a shifting silhouette emerged, silver-edged, weightless and towering. His voice cracked as he said, "Who is here?" But there were no footsteps, no wind, only the echo of divine presence. Then a voice thundered not in sound but in his chest, "You have been seen." The words pierced him, leaving a scarless wound that bled awe and fear together. Thomas staggered back from the glow, clutching his chest as though the words had seared into his flesh. His knees buckled, and he collapsed, gasping for air, whispering, "Why me?" The brilliance dimmed but did not vanish, hovering like a silent witness. The air thickened with solemnity, pressing him into silence. In his mind, a storm of doubt raged, for he had never believed himself worthy of divine sight. His trembling hand reached for the extinguished candle, but the wax was untouched, the flame now eternal. His eyes brimmed with tears as he realized he was no longer invisible to the heavens. Yet, fear coiled tight in him, twisting the gift into a burden. By dawn, Thomas wandered outside, hollow-eyed, consumed by what he had seen. The morning sun cut through mist that blanketed the hills. He stumbled into a chapel where Father Elias, the faithful guide, stood in prayer. The priest's aged voice carried through the silence, calm as a river. Thomas whispered, "Something came to me." Father Elias turned, his lined face grave, but his eyes gleamed with knowing. He said, "You have been touched, but the path will demand more than you think you can bear." Thomas fell silent, unsure whether to flee or confess the weight in his chest. News of Thomas's vision spread swiftly. At a village gathering, Margaret, the skeptic, leaned forward, her sharp eyes glinting with disbelief. She said, "You expect us to believe shadows danced and fire turned white?" Laughter stirred uneasily among the crowd, though some looked afraid. Thomas clenched his fists, stammering, "I saw it, I felt it." Margaret smirked. Dreams often feel real when guilt is heavy. Her words struck like cold steel, and the villagers' eyes turned with suspicion. Thomas stood in silence, torn between defending truth and retreating into doubt. Later that night, Thomas sat alone by the river, the water reflecting moonlight like broken glass. Samuel, the redeemed soul, approached quietly, his weathered face marked by scars of regret. He sat beside Thomas and said, "I once thought visions were lies, until mine nearly destroyed me." Thomas looked up, confusion clouding his eyes. Samuel's voice trembled but carried strength. "The burden is heavy, but truth is heavier when denied." Thomas whispered, "How do I bear it?" Samuel placed a hand on his shoulder, answering, "Not alone, never alone." In the silence, the river carried their words like prayer. That night, Thomas lay restless, his eyes refusing the comfort of sleep. The air turned heavy, and a pale glow seeped through his shuttered window. In the dreamscape, the divine messenger appeared, clothed in radiance that shifted like flowing water. The figure's presence stilled the chaos in his mind, commanding both terror and reverence. A voice deeper than time whispered, "The path opens before you, but each step cuts deeper than the last." Thomas trembled and said, "Why me?" Yet the messenger's form dissolved into the wind, leaving silence heavier than words. He awoke drenched in sweat, clutching the sheets, his heart echoing with the warning. At dawn, Thomas sought counsel from Father Elias. The chapel glowed with golden morning light streaming through stained glass, casting fractured colors across the floor. Kneeling, Thomas recounted the dream with a voice cracked by fear. Father Elias listened, his lined face unmoving, then said, "Dreams of light are not madness, but messages. Symbols speak where voices cannot." Thomas bowed his head, whispering, "I cannot carry this." The priest placed a trembling hand on his shoulder, saying, "You already do. Faith is not the absence of fear but the endurance within it." The weight of the words pressed against Thomas's weary soul. Later, Thomas met Margaret in the village square, his story already a whisper among the people. Margaret's sharp eyes narrowed as she said, "Visions are tricks of a desperate mind." Thomas answered, "It was real." The voice burned through me. Margaret folded her arms, tilting her head, and asked, "And this voice told you what? That you're chosen?" Her words cut deep, sowing doubt. Villagers lingered nearby, their silence heavy with judgment. Thomas felt the crowd's eyes like blades, and shame coiled tighter around him. His voice faltered, "I don't know why I was chosen." The square echoed with his uncertainty. By evening, Thomas wandered near the chapel again, where Samuel, the redeemed soul, sat quietly with eyes lowered. Samuel said, "I know the weight of visions. Mine led me to ruin before I found forgiveness." Thomas sat beside him, hesitant yet seeking comfort. Samuel continued, "Your burden may break you, but surrendering to fear will destroy you faster." The river breeze whispered between them, carrying faint scents of earth and stone. Thomas whispered, "I am not strong." Samuel's gaze, weary yet kind, rested on him. "Strength is found when weakness kneels." "You are not alone, Thomas." For the first time, Thomas believed it. That night, Thomas sat alone again. But this time, the silence was broken by a voice darker than night. The antagonist's presence filled the room unseen, whispering, "You are not chosen. You are cursed." Shadows lengthened, curling like smoke around him. Thomas pressed his hands to his ears, but the words burrowed into his soul. The taunt deepened. "Every soul you touch will break because of you." His chest heaved, tears streaming as he cried, "Leave me." Yet the laughter echoed, hollow and endless, drowning the air. In the corner of his eye, the faint light of the candle resisted, fragile yet unyielding. Thomas sat alone in his childhood home, the smell of aged wood and dust pulling forth memories he had buried. His mother's faded rosary lay forgotten on the table, untouched since her passing. He whispered, "I failed her." The words cracked through silence like glass. He saw himself as a boy, running from the church after her funeral, filled with rage against the God who took her. Now, guilt poured over him like a flood, and he pressed his face into his hands. If the light is true, why was I abandoned? His question lingered, unanswered, as the shadows of his past pressed in around him. Father Elias entered quietly, his steps soft against the creaking floor. He stood behind Thomas, eyes resting on the rosary. "She prayed for you until her last breath," Elias said gently. Thomas lifted his head, eyes swollen, whispering, "Then why did I turn away?" The priest placed the rosary into Thomas's trembling hands and answered, "Turning away does not mean you cannot return." The room seemed to hold its breath as Thomas stared at the beads, shame battling against hope. For a moment, his soul felt fragile, like glass balanced on the edge of breaking or healing. Later in the village, Margaret confronted Thomas with a crowd watching. Her voice was sharp as steel. "Do you not see? Your visions are illusions of guilt." Thomas replied, "I cannot deny what I felt." She laughed coldly. "Faith bends desperate men to madness." Villagers murmured, divided between fear and sympathy. Thomas's chest tightened, shame digging deeper. He wanted to speak, to defend, but his voice faltered. Margaret's words clung like chains, and doubt clawed at him. Yet deep within, a spark resisted, fragile but alive, whispering that his burden was not madness but purpose. At the riverbank, Samuel sat with eyes lowered, haunted by his own past. He confessed, "I once saw visions too, but I drowned them in wine and shame until I nearly destroyed myself." Thomas listened, his face pale, as Samuel continued, "The past clings like chains, but forgiveness can break them." His voice trembled, yet resolve sharpened each word. Thomas whispered, "But I cannot forgive myself." Samuel laid his scarred hand on his shoulder and said, "Then let grace forgive you." The water's reflection shimmered, like light fighting to pierce the darkness. As midnight deepened, the antagonist's voice returned, coiling in Thomas's thoughts like smoke. You are a fraud, unworthy of light. Shadows twisted across the walls, clawing closer. Thomas fell to his knees, crying out, "Leave me!" Yet the laughter reverberated, hollow and merciless. The air grew colder, choking his breath, as unseen hands of despair pressed down on him. In his desperation, he clutched the rosary tightly, its beads warm against his palm. A faint glow emerged from it, defying the suffocating dark. His sobs stilled, and for the first time, he resisted the voice by holding on to fragile hope. The morning after a restless night, Thomas walked into the woods, fog curling low across the ground. As he stepped onto a clearing, the mist parted and revealed a tree split by lightning. Yet instead of ruin, its hollow trunk glowed with a faint golden light. Thomas stopped, breath caught in his chest, whispering, "A sign." The wind stilled, and the birds fell silent, as though nature itself bowed to the moment. He reached out, trembling, and the glow pulsed like a heartbeat. For the first time, hope outweighed fear, and his eyes lifted toward the heavens with awe. Thomas rushed back to the chapel, finding Father Elias kneeling in prayer. He described the glowing tree, voice trembling with both fear and reverence. Elias listened carefully, eyes narrowing with gravity. "The divine often speaks through creation," he said softly. "This is no accident, but a call." Thomas asked, "But why me?" Elias looked at him with unwavering calm. "The burden is heavy because the purpose is great." Thomas lowered his head, clutching the rosary tighter, unsure whether to rejoice or collapse beneath the weight of being chosen. Later, Thomas returned to the village, where Margaret waited with arms folded, eyes sharp with doubt. She said, "First shadows, now glowing trees. Do you take us all for fools?" Thomas answered, "I saw it with my own eyes." Villagers murmured, some fearful, some intrigued. Margaret smirked, her tone cutting. Faith turns storms into miracles, and men into liars. The tension thickened, and Thomas felt shame claw at him, yet a flicker of determination remained. His voice trembled, but he spoke clearly, "The sign is real. Denial will not make it vanish." At dusk, Samuel found Thomas by the river, the golden glow of sunset painting ripples across the water. Samuel sat beside him and said, "I saw the tree too. It burned with light, but no flame consumed it." Thomas turned to him surprised, whispering, "You believe me?" Samuel nodded, his scar catching the sun. "I believe because I have lived the darkness. Light does not visit without reason." The words struck Thomas deeply, a balm against the torment of disbelief. For the first time, he felt less alone in the weight of his calling. As night fell, the antagonist returned, twisting the miracle into poison. Shadows writhed along the forest path where Thomas walked alone. A voice hissed, "The light is not a gift but a curse. Every sign brings ruin." Thomas froze, the air turning icy, breath visible. He whispered, "Leave me," yet the shadows surged closer, shapes clawing at the ground. His chest tightened, fear gnawed at his faith. Then, faintly, the rosary in his hand glowed once more, a fragile defiance. The clash of darkness and light carved itself into the night, testing the strength of his soul. Thomas knelt within the chapel, the flickering candles trembling as if sensing an unseen presence. Suddenly, the divine messenger appeared, light radiating with a gentleness unlike before. Its voice carried like thunder wrapped in mercy. "You are chosen to stand where shadows gather, and your weakness shall become strength." Thomas lowered his head, whispering, "I am unworthy." The messenger bent closer, shimmering like liquid fire, answering, "It is not worthiness but willingness that carries the light." In that moment, his heart throbbed with fear and awe, for destiny no longer felt distant. It breathed beside him. That night, Thomas dreamt of a valley drenched in shadows. The messenger stood before him, pointing to a distant mountain veiled in storm. "You will climb, and each step will strip away the fear within you, it declared. Lightning cracked, revealing faces in the darkness, those he had wronged, those he had lost. Thomas gasped, his voice breaking. Must I suffer again what I cannot bear? The messenger's eyes blazed with sorrow and truth. To carry light, one must walk through the fire. The burden is not to destroy you but to purify what you already are. In the chapel's quiet hours, Father Elias confessed to Thomas, his voice heavy with cracks of doubt. Even I have wondered if the silence of heaven is abandonment. Thomas looked at him with surprise, for Elias had always seemed unshaken. Elias's hands trembled as he grasped the altar rail. Faith is not certainty but trust when sight fails. I wrestle with shadows too. Thomas whispered, Then I am not alone in doubt. The priest placed his hand over his heart and said, You are never alone. Even the strongest shepherd limps, yet still he guides his flock. At twilight in the village square, Margaret confronted Thomas once more. But this time, her confidence wavered as a sudden miracle unfolded. The air shimmered, and a faint glow descended upon the crowd. Gasps filled the square as the glow lingered on Thomas, illuminating him like a vessel of light. Margaret's words caught in her throat, and fear replaced mockery in her eyes. Thomas, trembling, said, I did not seek this, but it has found me. The villagers fell silent, torn between awe and terror. For the first time, doubt no longer belonged to Thomas, it belonged to them. As the night deepened, shadows thickened in the woods beyond the village. The antagonist's voice roared louder, filled with venom. The signs deceive you. The light is a lie. Thomas, clutching the rosary, stepped forward into the darkness. His voice shook, but he answered, The lie is despair. The truth is what endures. The trees bent unnaturally. The ground shivered, but a glow encircled him like fragile armor. For the first time, he stood without collapsing, his fear replaced with resolve. The antagonist howled, retreating into the night, though its promise lingered. This is only the beginning. The night air hung heavy as Thomas walked into the forest where shadows gathered thickest. Every branch seemed to groan under the weight of unseen eyes. His chest heaved, heart pounding like a war drum. From the darkness came the antagonist, its form shifting like smoke, a voice echoing, You cannot stand against me. Thomas raised the rosary high, trembling yet resolute. I will not run. The earth quaked beneath him as the figure loomed closer, whispering curses. Though fear knifed through him, Thomas clenched his jaw and stepped forward. His trial had begun. Back in the chapel, Father Elias knelt in urgent prayer, his voice trembling yet steadfast. He whispered, Lord, shield him, for his burden is heavier than one man can carry. His fingers clutched the altar rail as sweat ran down his lined face. The flicker of candlelight cast long shadows across the stone walls, and though his body trembled, his voice did not falter. He prayed for strength not only for Thomas, but also for himself, as his own faith wavered beneath the weight of silence. Yet he pressed on, each word echoing like a lifeline thrown into the dark. In the heart of the forest, Margaret stumbled upon the edge of the clearing, her skepticism crumbling. She saw Thomas facing the shadow, the sight too real to deny. Her breath caught, and she whispered, It was never madness. The ground trembled, and the voice of the antagonist hissed, Doubt is your cage. Margaret fell to her knees, clutching her chest as fear consumed her. Yet for the first time she prayed, words spilling unbidden from lips that had mocked faith. If this light is true, let it save us. A tear slipped down her cheek. Samuel arrived at the riverbank, the glow of the conflict spilling across the water. He fell to his knees, whispering, I will no longer drown in shame. Raising his scarred hand toward the sky, he cried, Forgive me, and let my strength lift him. In that moment, his guilt broke like chains shattering. His face softened as peace touched him for the first time in years. The water shimmered, reflecting the faint glow of unseen grace. He wept openly, but his tears were not of despair, they were of release. The redeemed soul had finally been freed. The clearing erupted with chaos as the antagonist lunged, shadows clawing at Thomas's chest. He staggered, pain burning like fire, yet the rosary in his hand glowed brighter, scorching the darkness. He shouted, "You will not take me." The ground split, air vibrating with unearthly force. The antagonist shrieked, form distorting as the light pierced through. For a moment, the world seemed torn between destruction and salvation. Thomas collapsed to his knees, gasping, his body trembling, but the shadows recoiled, retreating into the trees. His trial was not victory, it was survival, bought with blood and faith. Thomas knelt in the clearing, chest heaving, body trembling from the clash. The forest was silent now, though scorched with shadows of what had just unfolded. He whispered, "I cannot rise again." His knees sank into the earth as tears streaked down his face. Then faintly the rosary glowed once more, not in defiance but in peace. The weight of despair pressed on him, yet the glow reminded him that light was never about power, but presence. Alone, broken and exhausted, he realized that surrender was not defeat. It was faith's first breath. The divine messenger appeared again, radiant yet gentle, standing at the edge of the clearing. Its voice carried like still water. "The final truth is this: you were never alone." Thomas lifted his head, vision blurred by tears, and whispered, "Then why did it hurt so much?" The messenger's light shimmered with sorrow as it answered, "Because fire shapes what stone cannot." Thomas's chest ached, but a quiet strength began to form within him. He reached toward the light, not in desperation, but in acceptance, as dawn spread across the sky like a promise. Back in the chapel, Father Elias stood before Thomas, his eyes filled with solemn pride. He raised his hand in blessing, saying, "You have endured the shadow and carried the light. May grace walk beside you always." Thomas lowered his head, humbled, whispering, "I am no more than dust." Elias smiled faintly, replying, "Even dust carries the breath of God." The villagers watched in silence, their doubt broken, their hearts trembling with reverence. Thomas did not feel powerful. He felt small, yet in that smallness, he felt whole. The journey of faith had made him new. Margaret stood apart, her arms no longer crossed in defiance but resting at her sides. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I doubted you. I mocked you. Forgive me." Thomas looked at her, no anger in his eyes, only quiet compassion. "There is nothing to forgive," he said. "We all walk blind until the light finds us." Margaret bowed her head, tears slipping down her face. The crowd witnessed her surrender, and in that moment, the skeptic became a seeker. Thomas felt a profound stillness, as though the circle of disbelief had finally been broken. That evening, Thomas returned to the riverbank where his journey began. The water shimmered under starlight, calm and endless. He whispered, "I was lost, yet the light found me." Samuel joined him, standing silently at his side, the scars on his face softened by peace. Together they gazed at the reflection of the stars, brighter than before. For a long moment, no words were needed. The silence was not emptiness but fullness, carrying the echo of a path endured. The shadows had not vanished, but Thomas no longer feared them, for light was now within him.